right, welcome again to our Cyber Up webinar. This is our second webinar this October that is for the Cyber Awareness Month. And today we are going to talk about crawl, walk, and run in Security Service Edge or SSE. Let me introduce to you the subject and our guest speaker today. We're going to be talking about, of course, what does it mean to start from scratch when you go into SSE or SASE? What are the top challenges when deploying these technologies, and what are the key considerations you need to think about and plan for when deploying these kind of technologies, SASE or SSE? We're going to have Q&A at the end, so feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A panel, and we're going to answer them at the end of the presentation. And at the end, we're going to also have a quick demo of our product. Now, let me introduce you our guest speaker today, John Grady, Senior Analyst from ESG. John, do you want to say hi?
Hi, folks. Tal, thanks for having me.
Yep. Thank you for joining us. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and start talking. Now, John is going to drill down into some key considerations when deploying, this type of new technology, which is Secure Access Service Edge or SSE. I'm going to give you a few examples, a few practical examples of things you need to do, or what are the challenges you're going to be facing when you're going to deploy a technology such as SASE or SSE. Going to talk about planning, about deployment, and about monitoring. Let me show you the planning slide. Just one second. This one is a bit tricky. All right. So a few examples of things you need to plan for when you are preparing to deploy a converged solution that is providing you with the security solution that is defined by SASE or SSE. First of all, you have to think about the identities synchronization, whether you want to sync this platform with an IDP, identity provider, or not. And identities are basically the core of this technology. A lot of what SASE brought to the world is the awareness that the user and the identity of the user are at the center of everything. And according to the identity, all the access permission and everything that basically a user can do in the system will be determined by the identity. So identities, again, are the most important thing that you have to think about when you are planning for such a deployment. Now, another item that is related to the identities is to talk about the right permission groups. Now, you can define different groups according to functional role in the organization, according to security level, according to various different business drivers or initiatives you may have within your organization. But it is important to define the right permission groups and in the right context so that it will be easier for you to provide these groups with the right permission that is going to work according to the Zero Trust principle. The Zero Trust principle, according to which SASE or SSE are built, is to give everybody the minimal level of permissions they need to have in order to do their job. And that ties in back to the permission group definition that needs to be accurate and continuously updated such that the right group of people will be able to access the right permission. I'll give you an example. For example, the finance group may have different permissions than the marketing group. The finance group will want to access different finance tools that may be sensitive or maybe not reachable for the rest of the employees in the company. Whereas the marketing team will need access to assets on the marketing side and never ever need to access the financial tools that the finance team are using. So it's important to define those groups and make sure that once you configure your platform, your SASE platform with the security policy, you assign each group with the right permissions they need to get in order to do their job. Now, the third item is the system integration. Whether you need to review what type of tools you already have within your existing system, within your existing IT infrastructure, and what kind of tools you will want to integrate with the SASE platform. That could be a SIM system that will be integrated with your SASE platform to collect the logs and allow you for better visibility into events and different types of analytics. It could also be forwarding the alerts to certain systems such as PagerDuty or any other kind of alerting system that potentially is used by your organization. So it's important to think ahead of what type of integrations, internal integrations you may want to have with the SASE platform inside your organization. Another example would be a geographic distribution. When you're deploying SASE, you're deploying it in certain geographical locations, and you want to think what is the most effective and important for your business. Of course, there's sometimes a cost for this geographic distribution. So you want to think about where do you want to deploy your data centers or POPs, and where would be the places in which your employees are going to be working from in a most effective way. Another point is to talk about the internet security requirements. SASE includes the Secure Web Gateway functionality and CASB as well. And these are features that are designed to protect against threats coming from the internet. In order to work effectively, you need to configure certain security policies so that the internet security tools will be able to work accordingly. And this could be pretty standard, right? Block all malware websites and block all phishing attempts. But it can also be a little bit more interesting according to your company's security policy. For example, if you are deciding to block certain social applications in certain hours of the day, or if you would like to block certain geographical areas in the world. So there could be some more advanced configurations here that need to be considered. And the last example here on the planning side is mapping resources. Where do you have resources you need to reach for secure access? Are they on the cloud? Are they on-prem? You need to think about where do you keep your assets. It's always a good idea, right? And you need to make sure that you are actually planning your network topology in such a way that will allow reachability to all those precious assets. All right. So some examples on the planning. Let's talk about the next phase in the actual process of deployment, which is actually the deployment itself, right? When you decide to turn on the switch and start deploying a SASE or SSE type of product. First of all, a good idea would be to start with gradual deployment. Start with a POC and expand. How do you do that? That's up to you, right? You can decide on a small group, a larger group, a more secluded group. There are many ways to do it, but we do recommend gradually growing the amount of users so that it will be easier for you to manage the migration. Another way to gradually deploy is to deploy different features first and other features a little bit later. So ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access, or Secure Remote Access, is usually the first use case that organizations tend to deploy, but it really depends on your urgent business needs. If your immediate need is to allow access to certain servers, then yes, secure remote access would be the best choice for you to start from. But if you have any other business need here, then you need to think about what is your specific prioritization according to your business needs. And the third point is to potentially add security features gradually, if that's possible. Starting with remote access, but then you can add device posture check, which will strengthen the actual security level and the actual trust you can give a specific device. So starting from basic and gradually, raising the bar in terms of security, adding potentially internet security a little bit later. So that's another way to potentially do this gradual deployment. And the last bit, an example is the is the monitoring piece. First of all, it's very easy to state that monitoring is always important. Definitely when you're deploying a new technology, you always have to monitor, right? But what do you need to specifically take care of? First of all, you need to make sure user access is not affected, because if you are transitioning from your potentially legacy system into a SASE or SSE system, you want to first of all make sure you maintain the right access to the people so that everybody can still do their job. So making sure everybody can access to whatever they need, but while still using the zero trust and least privilege principles is something you need to make sure and take care of. Another thing you should notice is the user issues. Monitor the usage of the actual tool by your customers or your users in order to detect any user experience issue. This is important because users that have bad user experience tend to shut off, security tools if they can, if you don't enforce it in the policy. And you don't want your users to start with the wrong foot out of the gate, because you want them to have a good experience with the platform. Make sure that the nothing is actually harming any kind of effect, any kind of productivity in the organization. It should not happen, but users sometimes report these kind of issues, and this may need some configuration change. And the last bit is internet security. You should probably monitor the logs and see if there's any need to potentially adjust or modify your internet security policy, such that maybe add bypass rules, such that specific content like Zoom or other kind of video would not go through a tunnel, through a VPN that could potentially sometimes cause latency issues. So this would be something that you would want to monitor based on the user feedback, based on any kind of statistics the platform provides you with, to make sure that the adoption is actually going well for you. All right, so these were a few examples of the things you need to think about when planning and deploying SASE. And then I will hand it over to John Grady here from ESG to review a few key considerations as well.
Thanks, Tal. I'm not almost going to take a step back, I think, and start, and I'll be brief, but, kind of the why SASE, why SSE, and I think this diagram kind of sums it up, fairly straightforward, but, the idea that the corporate environment looks nothing like it did just a few years ago. Previously, users and resources were kind of centrally located in on-premises locations, and now you've had a proliferation of cloud, more and more applications and data shifting to the cloud. Users, obviously went remote a couple of years back. Now are, in many cases, kind of in flux and working in hybrid scenarios. And so the traditional kind of concept of the perimeter really doesn't work anymore. There's no outside or versus inside, no kind of known good versus bad. Things are amorphous. And this has really, created more complexity from, an IT and certainly a security perspective. And that complexity, has really impacted the security side in terms of expanding the attack surface. And because attackers know this, they understand that, kind of IT and business evolution typically moves ahead of security teams' ability to kind of keep pace. And so they're on top of, looking for, gaps and defenses to try to exploit and compromise target organizations. So, we still see a lot of malware-based attacks, obviously, but again, attackers are, leveraging the fact that because so much traffic is application-based and encrypted now, it's easier for them to kind of obfuscate those attacks and get around detection tools, leveraging things like JavaScript as well to hide malicious payloads. We've seen the evolution of this, for quite a while, but attackers continue to, improve their methods in terms of malware delivery. Another aspect of this is using, this gets to, some of what Tal was talking about with the need for kind of internet security and secure access. The proliferation of compromised and malicious sites continues to expand. A lot of tools have trouble keeping pace with this because attackers can spin up new sites very quickly, take them down before web crawlers have the ability to understand that they are malicious. They continue to compromise known sites and exploit organizations through that avenue as well. And again, because users are remote, it can be difficult to ensure that they're safely browsing internet resources. And once they do get that initial foothold, it's a lot easier for them to move laterally, throughout the organization, because a lot of that typically was kind of east-west traffic, in the data center or within or behind the perimeter, is now moving north-south because users are outside of offices, and resources are in the cloud. And attackers also, through credential theft, are able to basically appear as valid users, making it even more difficult for security teams to understand that something malicious is going on. And all this ultimately leads to the issue of data access and data exfiltration, especially relative to the cloud. So you can see a couple data points here. And this is just one of the more kind of interesting data points that we have at ESG. So 33% of organizations say they've lost cloud resident data, and 28% believe they have, but they're not sure. That kind of lack of even visibility is really stunning. And on the previous slide, I didn't go into detail on all the different types of resources, but you have obviously your sanctioned, IT-led SaaS and infrastructure as a service based applications. But then there's a lot of unsanctioned apps where marketing personnel may spin up an instance of HubSpot for particular use, and there is customer data there. The organization doesn't even know, the security team doesn't even know it's there, to say nothing of kind of personal apps and kind of blurring of devices and work-life balance and things like that. Keeping track of data has become more difficult, and I think that data point really shows that. So again, this has really all led to this idea of SASE. And again, not to spend too much time here, but just to level set, I think this was a term Gartner introduced a couple, 3 years back now. And more recently, I think one of the best things that they did from my perspective, because in talking to users, the first kind of level set we had to have was the fact that this is, in many ways kind of two different things. It's secure service edge, and then this idea of WAN and edge infrastructure. I think they've updated that to SD-WAN. But in totality, this is a really, really big undertaking. And for most organizations, you're going to be kind of very focused on, at least at the start, kind of one aspect or the other. And a lot of, as we'll see in a slide or two, a lot of organizations are focused on the security aspect. And that makes sense. If you just look at the number of tools there, the fact that so many are based, have historically been based on premises, the idea of kind of converging and moving these tools to the cloud in and of itself is a big job. So I'm glad we kind of have common nomenclature to kind of set the discussion. But the idea here is, really incorporating more centralized management, but distributed enforcement to better address that reality of the modern enterprise that I led off with, the fact that, folks and resources, employees, users are everywhere. And we need, a different set of controls to really address that. And so relative to where organizations are, this is from a study we did earlier in the year, most organizations are still in planning. I think that's really the idea of this talk, and some of the information Tal shared and what I'll go through from this point on is, because so many folks are in the planning stage, what should you be thinking about? How should you be, what questions should you be asking? What assessments you should be making to, help this project go as seamlessly as possible. Only 37% said they've actually begun to implement SASE. And that can mean different things for different folks, and we didn't really qualify that. That can mean just kind of shifting some controls to the cloud, beginning to consolidate, things like that. But most are in the planning stage. If you net this out, what stands out to me is that only 3% have no current plans for SASE. So it's applicable to almost everyone. When the term was first introduced, it was very focused on distributed organizations from an office perspective. The pandemic kind of turned that on its head. With remote workers, I think we saw that shift not only to a security focus, but really that broadening applicability to organizations of all sizes, types, IT sophistication, and so on. So with that said, I'll walk through really 6 considerations I think to be kind of thinking about as you start planning for SSE and SASE more broadly. So Number one, think about this in context of the business problems that you're trying to solve. So first and foremost, nearly half of organizations choose to take, an SSE first approach to SASE. About 30% look at the network first, so SD-WAN, WAN optimization, things like that. And 20% say they're taking kind of a converged approach from the start. So the most common starting point is to focus in on security. And once you've identified that, what problems are you trying to solve? Is it the fact that users are working remotely and more commonly now and moving forward will be sometimes in the office, sometimes out, and you need to have consistency across both security controls and user experience, regardless of where they're working. Are you trying to support something broader like Zero Trust? I'll talk about this more in a minute, but we've seen these two things come closer and closer together. And Tal, referenced this. They are still separate, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to do one without the other, as we'll see in a moment. There is also just kind of a modernization aspect to this as well, and the idea that security should improve by ensuring that these controls work better together. You can see also secure IoT deployments on the list. So there's some very specific, initiatives that organizations are looking to support through this as well as kind of just modernizing, how branch office security is done and moving that to the cloud and so on. So I mentioned, other initiatives on the horizon, Zero Trust in particular. And, on the left is kind of the data I shared before with regards to where organizations are with SASE. And on the right is where organizations are with Zero Trust. And the Zero Trust data is a little less indicative of the market as a whole, because we did talk to respondents that were kind of moving forward are very aware of Zero Trust, so they were more likely to kind of have these initiatives underway. But still, 38% say they have a broad Zero Trust initiative underway, as opposed to just looking at Zero Trust from a use case perspective. But 61% of those with a broad Zero Trust initiative underway have already begun to implement SASE. So that it almost doubles. So if you're moving forward with Zero Trust, you're much more likely, as you look to kind of operationalize that framework and look for tools that can support that approach, be looking at SASE as one way to do that. And this is where really, I think, Zero Trust and SASE come together. I've highlighted one, but I'll walk through quickly all of these, because Zero Trust can be a very broad topic, can mean different things to different folks. We've seen this idea of modernization really come through more recently. I think starting with some of the executive orders that the Biden administration has put out and in their work to try to modernize at a federal level, and for some of the federal departments, cybersecurity practices. I think that hygiene, that idea took hold. Basically, the rest of the IT stack is fundamentally different. How do we think about updating security to better approach that? So this stood out for me, that so many practitioners are kind of thinking along those lines as well. There's also some strategic alignment here. So Zero Trust can help support digital transformation, cited by 35% of respondents, can help accelerate cloud adoption, tactical security drivers as well, as far as reducing the number of security incidents and preventing data exfiltration and things like that. But I've highlighted this idea of enabling secure remote access, and this is one area. I'll talk about this a bit later in terms of kind of finding gaps, but where traditional practices were really fundamentally broken when you think about kind of VPN based models, both in terms of scalability and security. And so a lot of organizations are turning to Zero Trust to help modernize secure remote access, kind of as a starting point. And then obviously, as these initiatives broaden out, that will be incorporated as well. So this is where SASE and Zero Trust really start to come together. In terms of consideration number 3, and I just mentioned this, but look at what you already have in the environment, and then identify really where there's some critical gaps. So, I think what this shows in terms of, and this is a little bit of an eye chart, but left to right, kind of the percentage of respondents who say a particular tool or technology is a starting point for SASE, a secondary consideration, or a future consideration. And you can see, the entire stack is really at play here. It's just a matter of when and what you're going to focus on at what point. And that is obviously going to be tied back to the use cases that you're looking to support. So understanding, that, and then, where you have the most trouble, currently, is a good way to go about this. And so, based on what I just mentioned about VPN, really no surprise that Zero Trust network access is at the top of the list. And Tal mentioned this as as kind of the starting point. I think you can start in a few different areas, but it's definitely ZTNA is, I think, the most common, and for most organizations, the most logical starting point, because it is such a big gap in an area where a lot of organizations are struggling. But Secure Web Gateway, CASB, regardless of kind of what direction you're ultimately going, thinking about where these tools are going to fit at some point in the timeline is usually a good place to start. And I talked, the idea of this is really convergence. And so, we wanted to understand, what tools are most critical to get from a single vendor. And to me, this wasn't surprising, but was good validation. If you look at the three at the top, ZTNA, CASB, and Secure Web Gateway, really comes down to this idea of, overlapping functionality. And then, I think the logic behind kind of converging protection for enabling secure access to private applications, which is what ZTNA does, public applications or SaaS apps, which is what CASB does, and then the internet more broadly, as Tal mentioned a couple of times in her part of the talk. Because Secure Web Gateway has some level of application control, there may be some, basic DLP functionality across all these tools. If you can kind of, even if you're not doing it all at once, have an eye towards how ultimately, these three tools are going to converge and work together as you're starting to do vendor assessments, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think this makes a lot of sense. So number 4, identifying key attributes for both short and long-term success. I think that's, overall, one of the things I want to stress is, you should be thinking about, SSE plans both through that short and long-term lens. I think we're actually, because of where we are kind of in the timeline here, where it's been, 3 years, seeing some organizations that maybe move, quickly out of the gates, maybe didn't have an appreciation for kind of where things were going to go and what they'd have to support further down the road, and starting to look for vendors that offer, a different, more cloud-centric type of approach that may, have capabilities that they didn't think they were going to need out of the gate. And so, some of these are kind of short-term, some of these are long-term. So ease and speed of deployment is obviously, can you get moving quickly, generate quick wins to kind of help build, momentum within the organization to expand over time. That's certainly important, but best of breed solutions, I think, would be more kind of longer term. And that doesn't mean best of breed necessarily in the traditional sense of the term, but really the idea that, organizations are not looking to sacrifice efficacy just for efficiency. There's a balance. And so you need to marry kind of strong security with this, ease of deployment and broad capabilities. So that's really important. 22% said, can the tools that I'm looking at integrate with my existing tools? Because I may not be able to deploy everything all at once, is this going to fit into the stack I have, at least in the short term, as I start to maybe migrate additional tools over and think differently moving forward? A transparent user experience. Again, Tal referenced this in terms of kind of, performance, and we see this with kind of digital experience management and things like that. But this is becoming really important to SASE and SSE platforms is transparency and experience, and making sure that users can access what they need to do their jobs without having to jump through hoops or do things differently. Think about kind of where they are, or things like that. Just access, pull up the app that they need to access, have that be done securely, but without them having to really, think about what it is they're doing. Again, Tom mentioned, monitoring and visibility, that's critical as well. And then ultimately, fully unified management. And again, this will become more important over time. But really, this is, and this is interesting as well, because, this is about supporting not only end users and protecting them and things like that, but obviously making the IT and security staff more efficient as well. And that's really what that point gets to. So we mentioned ZTNA as kind of a common starting point, but I did want to double click on this a little bit, because it's an interesting space that has really accelerated really right along with SSE. Prior to the pandemic, ZTNA was very kind of niche and use case focused. So there's a lot of focus on supporting third-party access to internal applications, supporting M&A activity, business expansion, things like that. And we do see a lot of organizations still starting kind of with a use case specific approach, although sometimes it is kind of broader, user or employee access to cloud applications or something like that. But this idea of VPN replacement has really taken hold. And I think there is a need for that, and it's the direction that most organizations are going. But what the data on the right shows is that it's still very early. So only 7% of organizations that are using ZTNA are currently using it for most of their secure access needs, and have basically replaced their VPN, almost completely. Another 13% said they're essentially working towards that. They're still they may still use some VPN, but they're definitely kind of moving in that direction. But 49% say that's kind of their goal. That's what they're interested in, but it is early. So what we see a lot of organizations doing, I think Tom mentioned this as well, really during the proof of concept, having an idea of what those initial use cases are, but using that POC as an opportunity to assess kind of scalability and whether it can address different use cases. We see agents versus agentless and things like that. And if you're looking to support employees, an agent-based approach may be fine, but if you need to expand to third parties over time, then does the vendor also support agentless? Things like that, to make sure that you actually can address all of the different scenarios that a VPN would, all the different applications, all the different users, protocols, things like that. Making sure you have an idea of that early in the process, even if the initial deployment is more limited and targeted. So, number 5 is actually, evaluating the vendors. So basically, you know the business problem you're trying to solve. You understand kind of from a tool perspective what that is going to, what your focus is going to be. You understand the broader initiatives. Now you're basically looking for partners who's going to help you, navigate this change. Because this is really about security transformation in a lot of ways. This in many ways, this is in reaction to digital transformation. So this is, security transformation. It's a good opportunity to, assess who you're working with and who's in the best position to help you moving forward. So, on the left, most organizations, the vast majority, are using at least 4 different vendors for their perimeter network security. To say nothing of the different tools, which is even more than that, and nearly 30 use at least 7. So there's definitely been sprawl over time. We've seen a lot of these technologies, obviously, ZTNA and CASB, advanced threat protection, sandboxing, kind of get layered on over time in some cases. And so what the data on the right shows, without kind of going into detail, is the likelihood of changing. So the light blue and dark blue bars are very likely and somewhat likely to change. And you can see across all these different tools, it's up well over 50%, nearly 60%. of respondents say they're likely to change vendors for these different tools. So they're essentially, using the implementation of SASE and SSE as an opportunity to really assess, who they want to work with moving forward. Again, who can give them the best opportunity for success, both in the short term and the long term. And so when it comes to the specific attributes you should be looking at from a vendor perspective for SASE and SSE, here are a few of the top ones. So network security expertise, that's kind of core to what SSE is. So again, that doesn't mean traditional firewall. I use network security kind of very broadly, but secure web gateway, secure access. So VPN would have traditionally been in there. I include ZTNA in there now, but do you have a history, solving these types of issues for users? 25% said availability of managed services. So do the vendors have a good ecosystem of partners to help, operate and manage these solutions going forward? That's not going to be important to all organizations, but for a lot, we see repeatedly about the skill shortage in the industry. And so this can really offer quite a bit of lift, especially, as you're dealing with kind of new tools and cloud-based tools for the first time. This can really help accelerate the initiative, and vendors that, have a strong track record of working with MSSPs and enabling MSSPs can certainly help with that. Right there alongside is a strong history of cloud delivered solutions. This is, again, we have a lot of vendors in the industry who have predominantly been on premises. They have either acquired in or kind of begun to move some of their tools to the cloud, but they may not be kind of cloud first or cloud native. So really assessing, what that architecture looks like. And this ties to the last point, what their network looks like. It's not about POPs, but it is about performance. So, what type of SLAs are they providing for latency and uptime and things like that? This becomes critical as, users are accessing, business critical applications. What that backbone looks like is really important. And so making sure that the vendor you're going to work with, has a history and then can kind of, put some guardrails around and make some promises around performance and uptime is very important. And then the last consideration here, it's good to anticipate curveballs that might be coming. So challenges and then really realistically what these timelines might look like. So this was really what was holding back organizations on expanding a SASE or an SSE initiative on the left. And so, as you think about SASE more broadly, the fact is that you have a lot of different teams, both within security and then, the broader IT team with networking as well, kind of having to come together and, make decisions and agree on a strategy and things like that. And, getting that cross-functional agreement can be difficult. So that's often a reason why, at least to start, these initiatives are more targeted. Tal mentioned, the idea of kind of policies and migrating existing policies, what that's going to look like depending on, what's already in place can be a challenge as well. I talked about Zero Trust and supporting Zero Trust as a use case, but making sure that these initiatives kind of marry to and map to Zero Trust can be difficult as well. And so that's why it's good to kind of assess that up front. I think that can help offset this as a challenge. I won't go through the rest of the list here, but understanding, Tom mentioned a lot of these actually, understanding kind of, when it's good to move to the cloud and shift some of these tools, getting a cross-functional agreement on vendors. These are all things that, you have to, be aware of going in. And the reality is that most do understand that this is going to take a while to get to kind of its logical conclusions. 70% believe it'll take a year or longer to fully adopt SASE. I think that even that's optimistic. If we're talking about fully adopting SASE, for most organizations, it would probably take closer to 2, if not more years. But understanding that it is going to be an iterative approach in some regards is good to know up front. And so, that's kind of what's holding back organizations from expanding. These are some of the drivers that will, kind of push organizations to expand. So, formalizing that longer term strategy for, remote work and hybrid work. And I've highlighted here really some of the internal metrics. So getting executive support. And this really has become, in many cases, a CISO and CIO kind of highlighted initiative because there's so many different teams and technologies being brought to bear. So making sure that you do have that support kind of higher up the chain is really important. Getting the company to approve skills, especially as you're kind of bringing on new tools and things like that, and obviously getting agreement on a broader strategy. Some of this is dependent on vendors as well. So because there's so many tools at play, some of this is just waiting for refresh cycles, and that's, I think, a reality. It's not the best reason, but it is a reality for a lot of organizations. And some of these offerings, are newer, and so there is a small percentage here, about a quarter of organizations that say as vendor offerings mature, they'll be more willing to expand. I think this is actually more the case for some established vendors who have really siloed tools and maybe packaging SASE as a package, but as not really a fully consolidated and converged technology. I think some newer vendors that are able to kind of build these solutions from the ground up have done a better job of building that out from the start. And then finally, I think we talked about the why, but these are some proof points on the successes that organizations that have already begun to implement SASE and SSE have seen. So, first and foremost, 85% of the organizations that we spoke to said they had 3 or more benefits from SASE and SSE. So that's telling in and of itself. And then in terms of what those benefits are, faster problem resolution. Again, Tal mentioned this one earlier. Can you understand kind of what's going on within the organization? There's an efficiency play there. Same thing with ease of management. And then we talked about, improved end user experiences. So there's some good proof points there. And then towards the bottom, lower security solution costs, not a top driver, but certainly a, ancillary benefit at a minimum, and reason to move forward down this path. And then fewer incidents. So, organizations are seeing success, better security, better efficiency, and ultimately better results. So with that, I will pass it back over to Tal.
Thanks a lot, John. That was wonderful. I actually have a question myself, if you don't mind. Let's go back to I think it's slide 20. I'll move back. I think the first thing that kind of jumped to my eye here at the getting cross-functional agreement on SASE strategy as one of the top challenges, or actually the top one, and it was repeated in other slides in other forms, right? Getting management support of SASE, getting other buy-in from other organizations within the company for that. How do you think, an IT admin that is a proponent of SASE that wants to push SASE inside the organization, how can they deal with this kind of more political challenge, or I don't know what kind of intercompany challenge that is?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about an admin, I mean, it's tough. I think you need support. So I think you need to as you kind of go up the chain towards kind of the CISO and the CIO. This goes back to the first consideration, tying this back to business issues and problems, and how these tools, technology solutions can solve for those. That's the language they speak, and so I think that can kind of help you get attention, and then by getting that on their radar and having them understand how this is kind of broad, and it needs leadership on some level, maybe not the CIO CISO for all organizations, but I think that's really the only way to do it. If you just think about the network security team, the SOC team, data security, all the different aspects that are kind of being brought to bear, you need someone who's going to be able to have those conversations, understand what the other teams are thinking, and start getting everyone pulling in the same direction. That doesn't mean that's going to happen from day one, but I think that's really the goal. Kind of, talk their language, and kind of get that more senior sponsorship.
That's that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I'll ask another question that came here from the audience that is a little bit more specific, but still interesting. What are some of the manufacturing specific security use case that you have generally encountered? John, do you want to?
That's a good one. I mean, broadly, I don't think the manufacturing sector has been spared from, especially at the executive and kind of management level, the shift to work from home. So there's still all of those considerations. But I did mention IoT. I will say IoT as a use case, was listed for SSE, but actually rose in prominence for kind of fully converged SASE, which I found interesting. So I think in some cases, those manufacturing companies may be more interested in kind of, converged secure network access and that kind of idea. There's still, something to be said for just purely securing IoT deployments. But I think that use case becomes much more top of mind for manufacturing organizations. And the secure access, just from a ZTNA perspective, there's a lot of need to connect into those types of connected devices on the manufacturing floor and things like that. So I think that ZTNA, from a technology perspective, ZTNA use case is top of mind as well.
Definitely agree, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Actually, questions about IoT and how do you secure, every device within the office that is also related to manufacturing. That's definitely a common use case. All right, I think that's about it for our Q&A for today. I want to leave time for Kim here. Kim Kunzler from our team is our regional director of sales, and she will be performing a demo of our platform here. Kim, take it away.
Thank you, Tal, and thank you, John. So let me just share my screen here and show you guys how we typically are working with companies to implement Zero Trust and secure remote access for their organizations. Like John mentioned earlier, which I think is a really great point, the traditional concept of the perimeter really doesn't exist anymore, right? With infrastructure, organizations now have cloud infrastructure, software as a service tools, the open web, employees are working remotely. So it's a completely different landscape than it was even years ago. Now we've done like 2,700 roughly implementations, and companies will look at Zero Trust for a variety of reasons, right? Like it might be, like John alluded to, there have been government-related mandates on the security side. It very well may be compliance-related, right? If you're in the healthcare space, financial services, law firms, sometimes you're seeking to make sure all of your T's are crossed and I's are dotted when it comes to things like SOC 2 compliance and ISO compliance. So sometimes that's a driver for looking into Zero Trust, but also just adapting to the changing landscape, right? Employees who are now working from home where they really weren't before, migrating infrastructure into cloud and not really knowing how to secure that properly. Bringing on contractors or different types of workers. And so wanting to better enable BYOD more securely. Bring your own device. So there's a variety of things that kind of cause organizations to look at this space to begin with. What I'm showing now is really just from a 30,000 foot view, our architecture. When we're implementing Zero Trust remote access for network access for an organization, this is what it looks like at a very high level. So usually the goal is to take the corporate stack resources of an organization, which could be on-prem resources, right? Your sites, your data centers, offices, your cloud infrastructure, if you have any of that. So your Azures, your AWS, GCPs of the world, Oracle, any software as a service tools, and even the open web we're now considering part of the corporate stack. So, we really want to put a perimeter around your corporate stack resources, around an organization's corporate stack resources, so that they can better protect and provide much more granular access into their infrastructure. So not only being able to control what a user is accessing, but even how they're accessing, right? Down here is the end user. So we're looking at, are these employees coming from company-owned devices? Like John mentioned, are they contractors or third parties who might be coming for personal devices? So really looking at all the factors that are going to elevate your security in a way that will protect against all of those threats that both John and Tal spoke to. So when we create a network, just as a sample topology here, we have data centers all over the globe that we manage from a security and a service level perspective. And so when we look at a particular organization, typically you want to create local points of presence or spin up gateways and data centers that align well with your end users, right? So that data is traveling a very short distance, and therefore performance is very good when they are connecting to resources. So we'll spin up gateways in different data centers for an organization. For Perimeter 81, for example, we've got team in Tel Aviv, New York, Los Angeles, some other locations as well, but that's where we'd put gateways. They come with static IPs, typically gateways. This is important too for compliance. Like, you usually want to find gateways that are just dedicated to your organization so that you can be sure that only your data is running through there, which will keep it the most secure. And then from there, like I said, you really want to make sure that your employees will be able to get secure access to infrastructure, whatever that may be for the individual, right? Maybe in a particular organization, a sales team might really only be accessing software as a service tools, or might really only be accessing the open web, versus maybe your accounting team might need to get access into an ERP, or something similar. Your dev team might need access into your production environment in AWS. So we're really focused on least privilege access, right? True of zero trust. You really want to be able to say, by default, nobody should get access to anything. And let's just really be thoughtful about what a user like John specifically is going to access, and even how John is going to access, which really speaks to the different types of access you could enable for a particular user. True to zero trust, you want to be able to authenticate in different ways. Authenticate a user, authenticate a device, for example. So in our case, we're usually working with a particular company's single sign-on and multi-factor. So integrating with some identity provider, right, which can be your first check, your first line of defense is authenticating the user themselves, maybe putting them through some type of multi-factor, which could come from you or could come from us. And then, looking at how you're granting them access. So John spoke to this, beautifully, speaking to, you also want to think about the endpoint, the actual physical device itself. Where did that come from? In certain cases, it's a company-owned device. In other cases, it might be a personal device. So typically, we recommend different modes of connecting for different end users. If it's a company-owned device, you might want more of a low-touch experience for that user, right? The benefit of owning a device for an employee is usually so that you can keep it controlled, keep it secure. And so you can look for more of an agent-based, client-based access that, in my case, you can see we literally have always on enabled. We've disabled sign out for me. So every time I'm on a work device, it's always encrypting. It authenticates me based on user. It can actually also authenticate based on device credentials, which is another line of defense. So, let's not only prove that this person is in fact tall, but let's also check that tall is coming from a company-owned device. That does she have our certificate installed, or is she running our antivirus or disk encryption or some other credential? So you can check for that too, as we do. So that's another line of defense. And then it's only going to connect me to whatever resources the admin has deemed appropriate for me. This all happens in milliseconds. You can see I'm in New York right now, so I connected to the local point of presence before getting connected to my resources. And it's very low touch. It just runs in the background. In the situation of personal devices, right? Maybe you're trying to more securely enable BYOD. A lot of times we see, and I know I only have a couple minutes here, but a lot of times we'll see organizations who have employees out in the field who might have iPads, tablets, or they want to enable personal devices when employees work from home. Maybe they have contractors. That can be where agentless is more advantageous from the Zero Trust perspective. So agentless access, it looks like this. You do not need an agent installed, so nothing to install to the computer. And it's a reverse proxy through the browser. So why this is valuable for enabling BYOD more securely is really that, if I'm on my personal laptop right here, you can not only grant me access to specific internal applications, so grant me very granular access, but my personal device is never actually touching the company's network. So it's just emulating me these applications. And you don't have to worry about their personal device, right, which might have viruses on it or different malware. You don't have to worry about that harming your network. So it's a really secure way to enable BYOD. And all of this you can manage through a central platform, right? We replace, like a Zero Trust solution can replace VPNs you might have used in the past, any remote access tools you might have used. We're a full firewall as a service as well for cloud infrastructure, so you don't need like a virtual firewall for AWS or for Azure. So you're really able to centralize all of your policies across on-prem, across cloud, across the web in one place. And that's good for network visibility as well, right? Just from a security perspective, speaking strictly to that, you really want to be able to see very clearly without toggling between, multiple tools, who you've given access and how you've given access to different areas of your network. So if you were to, implement Zero Trust, it would look something like this. We're certainly obviously happy to answer more questions, but I will leave it at that for now.
Right. Thanks a lot, Kim. And thank you very much, John, for joining us for this webinar. We will conclude our webinar for tonight. Next week, we have another one that is focused on the architectures of SASE and SSE and the benefits of different types of architecture. So we'll be more than happy to have you next week with us for the next webinar. Thank you again for all our guests, and good night.
Thanks.